Wonderful to have the opportunity to learn with you as always. Tonight, I actually want to go back in time. My personal area of interest is early modern Jewish history, and one of the kind of factors that drew me to the early modern period as opposed to the medieval period is the sense that in the medieval period, there's just such a paucity of information. We have so many fewer documents and so many fewer sources. And I find that the material sometimes for that reason isn't able to be as rich and as textured. So we're going back to the end of the 14th, beginning of the 15th century, and you'll feel it, right? There's just not as much that we know about the people and the stories and the character of the events that are happening in this period. Again, it's uneven, and sometimes we have lots of documentation, and it can be very rich and very textured. But as a general rule, obviously, the closer you are to the thing, the more information about it you'll have access to. So what I want to do tonight is actually turn back the clock and talk about a man named Rabbi Yisrael Isserline, better known by the title of his most famous book, which is the Trumas Hadeshen. And we called this series the Titans of Ashkenaz, and we tend to think of the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserlis, as a kind of pivotal point in the history of Ashkenaz. He, as we've talked about in the past, was responsible for organizing and synthesizing and codifying, to a large extent, the Ashkenazic tradition of the Tosafists and his predecessors in the medieval period. And he wrote the Darkei Moshe and the glosses to the Shulchan Aruch, which then became canonical. Okay. So all of the individuals that we've studied over the past weeks, are relying on the Ramah as the kind of basis for the positions that they might take up, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, but they're heirs to the legacy of Rav Moshe Isserlis, who was in turn an heir to an earlier legacy. So the individual that I want to focus on tonight predates Rav Moshe Isserlis by 150 years. And what I want to share with you is the sense of how his sources became seminal contributions to the formation of the Ashkenazic canon. So in a certain sense, it's like looking at the prehistory of Ashkenaz. It's the history of Ashkenaz, right? But in the sense of the Ramah carrying things forward, these are sources that were instrumental in informing the commentary and the texts that the Ramah left to us, which is our legacy of Ashkenaz. So let me share with you a little bit of biographical information. I want to talk about one kind of defining quality of the book that we're going to study a little, and then in the second half of this presentation, I want to share with you some of the contributions of the Trumas Hadeshen to Hilchos Chanukah, and kind of appreciate some of the lived traditions and the lived halachos as they've come down to us through this filter of this very important work. So Rabbi Yisrael Isserline was born, we think, we don't really know, but approximately in the year 1390 in the Duchy of Styria, which is in present-day Slovenia. And, we don't usually think of Slovenia as a bastion of Ashkenazic Jewry, but at the end of the 14th century, there's an important Jewish community living there. His life spanned about 70 years. He died in 1460. He was the rabbi in a town called Maribor. And in about 1450, toward the end of his life, he moved to Neustadt, which is in Lower Austria, not far from Vienna. He was, in addition to being a communal rabbi, it seems that he was a Rosh Yeshiva and ordained many students, some of whom were quite prominent. And his yeshiva, because of his presence, and he was really the most prominent rabbi of his day, his yeshiva attracted students from all over. So we have them from Austria, Bohemia, Moravia, Hungary, Silesia, Bavaria, and the Rhineland. And in some ways, they say that he was really an heir to the pietistic and ascetic tradition of the Hasidei Ashkenaz. For another topic, but you had in Ashkenaz in the medieval period these pietists, these Ashkenazic pietists, who again were devoted to the letter of the law and to going beyond the letter of the law and to a life of asceticism. And there's some legacy that continued in the work of Rabbi Yisrael Isserlein. His work was quite important. There are really two books. They were sort of published at the same time that we'll talk about. One is known as the Trumas Hadeshin, which is a series of responsa, questions and answers. And then you have his psakim. You have his piskei halacha, where he's not writing a code, but he tells you this is the halacha in the following circumstances. So in the life, particularly of Ashkenazic Jews in German-speaking land, Polish-speaking lands, the work of Reb Isserlein is very important. As I mentioned, it informs very often the commentary and the glosses of Rav Moshe Isserles. You can even see in source number 1. I won't put it on the source sheet, but just to mention. The Yam Shel Shlomo, Reb Shlomo Luria, who's a contemporary of the Ramah in Ashkenaz, but a kind of independent thinker, just goes on the record by saying, he says Das Maharai, which is the acronym for the Trumas Hadeshin, Ikar, and just skip to the end. Umidvarav al Tasur, never stray from the words of the Trumas Hadeshin, Ki haya gadol umuflag biyamav. Okay, and that's a moniker that's reserved for certain exceptional people. He was considered to be a giant in his day. Trumas Hadeshin, why did he call the book Trumas Hadeshin? The gematria of Deshen is 354, and there are 354 sections in the book. That was a common means by which to title a book. You have the title correspond to the number of the chapters, the gematria of the author. So the book was called and has been forever more known as the Trumas Hadeshin. I'll just say one more point about the book's history. It was printed for the first time in 1519 by a very well-known printer, by Daniel Bomberg, known for the Bomberg Shas. And Venice is the hub, is the capital of Jewish printing in this generation. It's the early years. Think of the earliest Hebrew books are printed in the final decades of the 15th century. So printing is still very new and still very costly. It's very expensive, and publishers had to basically make a bet. They had to make an informed decision if they were going to accept a printing or a publishing project. They had to be pretty sure that the book was going to be popular enough to sell enough copies to make the project worthwhile. Not that much has changed in 500 years. So the book was published, and how do you know, right? How can you tell? We don't have the printer's catalogs from the 16th century, the bookshop receipts. We don't know. How do you know if a book was successful? There's no bestseller list. The best indicator of whether and to what extent a book was successful was how soon it was republished. And if it went 200 years without being republished, so that tells you that there were plenty of copies to go around the first time. But this book was published first in 1519, and then as soon as 1546, it was republished, again, in the same location. So, sometimes the book is published in one place, and then shortly thereafter, in a faraway location, the book is not available in that. But here it's published in the exact same location, so that indicates that it was obviously very popular in its day. And again, this is after the death of long after the death of the author, but is quite popular in the 16th century. Perhaps the most well-known and defining quality of the Trumas Hadeshen has to do with the let's say originality of the questions that are treated in the book. So 99% of the time, when you open up a book of responsa, right? What's a book of responsa? We call it shilos and shuvos, literally means questions and answers. So what's that genre of literature? So I'm a rabbi in a small town. A question comes up, a halachic question, and I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer this question. So I write to someone who is qualified, and I describe the question, and maybe I share some thoughts about what I might think the answer is, and then someone writes back. The person who writes back typically keeps a copy of the question and the answer, and the collected questions and answers can be compiled into a book of responsa literature. Okay, and it's a very important genre of halachic literature, as we talked about a little last time. That's the best way to think about this genre as a general matter. Let me share with you the comments of the Shach, the Sifsei Cohen, writing in the 17th century, in source number 2. I don't want to get too far afield and take you into the particulars of what he's discussing. Just the comment that he makes at the very end. He said, "Can you extract a piece of information from the question that was cited by the Trumas Hadeshen?" And he says, "Lo noda," the very end, the bolded in source number 2. "Lo noda shehashelos shebetrumas Hadeshen asa maharai bal hatshuvos atzmo velo shesha'alu acherim kimo bepiskei ksavav." So he says you can't extract anything historically from the question of the Trumas Hadeshen, because he says it's well known that the Trumas Hadeshen wrote his own questions. Okay, so what does that even mean? And we'll see some examples in a moment. What would it mean for someone to write their own questions? Is that like a form of plagiarism? Are they trying to pull a fast one on us? What does it mean that the Trumas Hadeshen wrote his own questions? Okay, and this wasn't just the position of the Shach. This was a very old story and a very kind of well-known reputation of this book. The Shem HaGedolim in source number 3 is a kind of encyclopedia of both rabbinic personalities and rabbinic works, composed by the Chida Chaim Yosef David Azulai in the 18th century, who wrote many fascinating books. And in his entry on the Trumas Hadeshen, he writes the following, source number 3: "Harav Maharai Chibar Shilos and Trumas Hadeshen ve'enam halacha l'maaseh." Right, these were not practical matters that somebody wrote and said, "I found a chicken and there was a problem and I can't tell and I want you to tell me, please." That's not what this book contains, like the normal genre of Shilos and Shuvos. Rak harav atzmo alav v'nistapek u'pesach b'tshuva. It just happened to be that the author had a particular question or issue that he wanted to bring up, and so he formulated the question and then used that as a pretext to produce a commentary or an answer, as if someone had asked that question. Okay? And if you stop someone in any beis medrash in 2023 and you say, "Tell me what's unique about the Trumas Hadeshen," right? So that's always the Rabbi. The Trumas Hadeshen, he didn't write his own shilos. He didn't respond to. Actually, he wrote his own shilos that he could answer with his tshuvos. So I just want to point out that the case is actually slightly more complex than this kind of oversimplification, and you can see this already in the Beis Shmuel in the following source, in source number 4. Okay. He says, Ki betruma sedeshin ein lomar haya hamase kach. He says you can't in the regular shilas and shuvas, you could point to the question and say, oh, this was the case. This happened, and then that happened. He says, when it comes to the truma sedeshin, you can't really say that. This is because the cases in the truma sedeshin didn't really happen. They weren't based on actual facts and evidence. It says, nonetheless, the Yesh Lomar afagav de lo sider al masa shahaya. It's true, even though they weren't organized like a regular series of shilas and chuvos based on actual cases. Mikomakom chuvos zu isa nami bipsakav sider al masa shahaya. Amrinam gam chuva zu b'truma sedeshin hay al masa shahaya. I mentioned that there's two parts to the writings of the Truma Sedeshin. One is the quote-unquote Shilas and Shuvos, the response, and the other is the Psakim, the decisions, and the Piskei Halacha. And he says, if you look through both books, sometimes there's overlap. And in the Piskei Halacha, you might have the name of a person, you might have the name of a place. There's actual real stuff happening there, and then you see the same case alluded to without the names or the places in an edited form, in an edited version, in the Shilas and Shuvos. So the Beis Shmuel is saying they're not made of whole cloth. Maybe some of them are. But often the cases that we're seeing in front of us are just a kind of edited version of something that did, in fact, that did in fact happen. And there's a contemporary scholar who wrote a piece about this fairly recently, named Tirza Kelman. And just to extract one line from her article, she says the Truma Sedeshin is a text imitating the conventions of the responsa genre, but not an outcome of correspondence between people seeking an authoritative answer from a halachic leader. Okay. So there's an important difference between what's happening in the Truma Sedeshin. There is this quality of the author taking some liberty with the cases. But at the same time, they're not pulled out of whole cloth. They're often based on something very real and something very important. And I'll just say, sort of worst case scenario, even if they were all made up, again, it's not that someone was trying to pull the wool over the reader's eyes. It's just that for whatever reason, and we could think about this, the author wanted to formulate his work in the genre of responsive literature, and so he borrowed the genre. Okay, so sometimes you'll have a particular writer wants to make an argument, wants to make a case, and they'll present the case as a dialogue, as a conversation. So it's not that you're hearing something that didn't happen. Right, it's just formulated in a particular genre because there was some preference for that genre.
Okay. Why is this an issue? I mean, it's a teaching technique. It's didactic.
Yes, it's a teaching technique, and it's used to great effect. The kind of asterisks that you need to kind of identify is that the cases themselves, right, as opposed to other responsive literature where you have an actual case and you may be able to extract something about what actually happened, and you may have two responsa that are treating the same event or the same case. You can't do that as readily with the Truma Sedeshin. You have to take it as an academic work as opposed to a recording of actual lived events, or they might be something a little less than actual lived events. But again, it doesn't diminish in any way from the contents or the arguments of the work, and it's actually a good segue, because as we'll see in a moment, the contents and the arguments of the work have withstood the test of time, right? And 600 years later, we're still, maybe often without knowing it, reliant on the arguments of the Truma Sedeshin. So let me pause there and just ask if there are any questions or comments, and then I want to jump into the text because everything I've said is so abstract. But then we'll look at some examples together.
Some halachic discussions are followed by the word ma'aseh, as if what we just discussed was Truma suggestion type of thing, but now I'm telling you something that really happened.
Yes, yes. Meaning that's often the tip, or that's often the clue, to signal that this was a real case. Okay, so let's look, and I hope we'll have time to see a few of these examples, and it'll double as a kind of preparation for Hanukkah, which is just 48 hours away, a little less, and it's a good time to just review a couple of the halachos, or a couple of the notions that animate some of what we do when it comes to Hilchos Hanukkah. So if you're with me at source number 6. There is an important question that comes up with lots and lots of applications. What if you're not home for Hanukkah lighting? Okay. You might be at a Hanukkah party, you might be at your sister's house, you might be at a bar mitzvah, you might be at a hotel, you might be traveling. So the basic mitzvah, we know, Ner Ishu Beso, everyone lights a Hanukkah candle in their house. But what if you are not in your house? Okay. So it's a big topic, and we could spend lots of time answering all kinds of implications of that question. But here's one. Truma Sadeshin writes the following. Source 6. Sheila achsanai shehu nasui rishayhu lahadlik bivracha chutz lebeso olav. Someone who is a guest in someone else's home, someone who's a guest in a hotel, someone who's a guest in a home. You're talking about a married man. And he's not together with his wife. So his wife is back at home, and he's on the road. He's planning to light a Hanukkah candle because he's an observant Jew. The question is he permitted to light a Hanukkah candle with a bracha? It's not his house. The halacha is to light a candle in your house. He's not in his house. And what's more, someone is performing the mitzvah of lighting a candle in his house. Ishto Kagufo, his wife, is taking responsibility for the family's home, and she's lighting the Hanukkah candle for the home, for the family. So this traveler now is going to light anybody could light a candle. There's nothing wrong with that. But should you say a bracha in that context? Okay, and again, you could sort of see, like, I don't know, did someone really write to him and ask that question? Or did he pose the question so that he could write this following little essay? Tshuva, and we won't go through the whole thing, but he says, says you have to be very careful about this matter. And then he goes on to say that really it's appropriate to make a bracha in this context. And then he actually offers a fascinating and quite novel halachic argument. So we all know that there's different levels and a great debate about what constitutes the Ikar Hadin and Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin. You light one candle, everyone lights multiple candles on every night of the week. One person lights multiple candles, and right, a lot of ways to skin the cat, but we know that lighting more than one candle constitutes this notion of Mahadrin, which is why on the 8th night of Hanukkah we light 8 candles. The bold at the end of source 6. He says, he says, I'll prove to you from the notion of Mahadrin that it's appropriate to say a bracha on this candle lighting not happening in the home. He says, he says, let's just do the math. Let's just work it out from a conceptual perspective. You're telling me that Hidur Mitzvah means more candles is better. Multiple people lighting in one home, more than one candle, that's always better. He says, I'll just apply that same concept. Mahadrin is the operative principle on Hanukkah. Hachinami yesh hidur b'ner leishto b'shnei makomos. So there's a couple. One of them is a man and a woman, a husband and a wife. One of them is lighting in one place. One of them is lighting in another place. That's a hidur mitzvah, right? Says Vatana lo psikale lenisne hach mahadrin to lo shchicha kuleha. Yes, the answer. So he's anticipating the question that, well, if that constitutes mahadrin, how come we never heard of it? You never saw that in the Gemara. No one ever had that case. No one ever said, oh yeah, multiple places, two people in one family should light in two places. He says, no, that was a little too uncommon to kind of make the cut. So it didn't rise to the level of being included in the Talmudic conversation. But it's the same principle. V'kevan de'ashkechan b'talmud mahadrin, u'mahadrin min mahadrin, ein zeh kemosif ala talmud shu garua, goreya. This is not just this is not like a new concept. We have the concept. This is just an additional application of the principle that we already knew. Jump ahead to source number 7. Right, the Trumas Hadeshin went on record as saying this. He wrote this obviously in the first half of the 15th century. A little bit of an unusual case, and once you get to the codified halachos of the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, lo and behold, look what we find. Source 7. Yesh omrim she'alpa pisha madlikin alav b'soch peso imhu b'makom she'ein bo Yisrael madlik b'brachos. So the Shulchan Aruch says, and this is quite circumscribed, he says, what about a case where the man is out traveling, his wife is home, and she's lighting at home, or anybody else is lighting at home, and now he's out on the road, but he's someplace where there's no other Jews around. So the Shulchan Aruch says, in that case, if you're the only Jew, someone should be lighting Hanukkah candles, and you could light Hanukkah candles even with a bracha. Now the Ramah jumps in, and here's our Ashkenazic tradition. The Ramah jumps in, he says, Ki chayav liros haneros, because someone, this person has to be in a position where he's at least seeing Hanukkah candles. It's one thing if you're, staying with other Jews, so they're lighting, so I don't have to light. But if I'm the only Jew around, so I have to light my own candles. Now he adds, what if he's not the only Jew around? He's with other Jewish travelers. He's in another Jewish home. And he sees other Hanukkah candles. But if he wants to light his own candles, he can light candles and he can say a bracha, and that's our practice. And where does he get that from? Straight out of the Trumas Hadeshin. So that becomes the normative. Halacha, and we've all experienced this. We've all seen this because in one form or fashion, we've all been guests in their locations or had experiences of not being home for Hanukkah, and we don't just rely on the fact that someone back in our house is lighting Hanukkah. We light our own Hanukkah candles. We light them with the bracha. We do it because you open up the Shulchan Aruch and you see the Ramah says that's exactly what we should do. In point of fact, the Ramah says that's exactly what we should do because the Trumas Hadeshin said that's exactly what we should do. I want to share with you a couple more examples to get a fuller sense of just how pervasive the Trumas Hadeshin's work is for us Ashkenazic Jews. Take another example in source number 8. Here's an interesting question. She'ela. Did it really happen? Did it really not happen? Not sure. It's the Trumas Hadeshin. Maybe he just used this as a pretext to write an essay about the topic, or maybe somebody asked the question. We have an important principle in Hanukkah. You light Hanukkah candles, and didn't last as long as it should have lasted. And 10 minutes after you lit the candle, the thing went out. So do you have to relight the Hanukkah candle? The answer is no. You lit the Hanukkah candle. If you didn't put enough oil, it was too short. Okay, but assuming you did everything right, you had a normal amount of oil in there and was supposed to last for half an hour, but it didn't. There's no obligation to relight the candle. You're covered. You did what you were supposed to, and you could rely on the fact that you put in a good yeoman's effort. Question is, Im kapsa be'erev Shabbos kodem kabbalah Shabbos shaharei tzrichem lidlok mibod yom zakuk la kehagavna ola. Does the same halacha apply on erev Shabbos? What's the difference? Just remember, let's just say, for argument's sake, that Tzeisa Kochavim is at 5 o'clock, and on a normal Tuesday, you're going to light candles at 5 o'clock, and they're supposed to burn until 5:30, As long as half an hour of oil, you're good to go. But what time are you lighting on Friday afternoon? You can't light at 5 o'clock. It's too late. It's already Shabbos. So you light at 4 o'clock before candlelight. So, and you have to have enough fuel to make sure that it's going to go for 90 minutes. The difference is when you light at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, that's not really the right time to be lighting candles. It's still daylight. You're just forced by virtue of the fact that it's going to be Shabbos to light that early. So do you say the same halacha when it comes to lighting candles on Friday afternoon, or is there a new set of rules? You hear the question? Okay. So the Trumas Edition writes in source A, Tshuva, Yired de'ein zakuk la'afilu ki agavna. Even on Friday afternoon, you lit the thing and it went out. It went out at 4:02. It's not Shabbos yet. You could still relight it. It's only been burning for 2 minutes, and it hasn't burned at all, after dark. On a Tuesday night, so you lit it and it burned from 5 to 5:02. At least when you lit the thing, it was the right time for it to be lit. Friday afternoon, it's not even the right day. It hasn't happened yet. We're just lighting early. He says, even so, no obligation to relight. Even though we all know that really the mitzvah is to have the candles burning at the end of Ben Hashmashos, after it's dark. Right, in my example, 5 o'clock and no earlier. Because you light a candle during the day, so it doesn't catch anybody's attention because it's daylight. Right? The thing only sheds light in the darkness. He says, what you see is that the real mitzvah is not at the time when you lit the thing, right? But really, it has to last until dark. Which would lead one to believe that you have to relight the thing to give yourself the best possible opportunity for the candle to burn after Tzeis HaKochavim. However, he says, he says, 1 second. If it's good enough to be able to say a bracha on the lighting of the candle at 4 o'clock, in my example, right? What mitzvah was there? It's not 5, it's too early. But if we're telling you that you can even make the bracha at 4 o'clock, then clearly what you see, there is a principle called hechsher mitzvah. You put the mitzvah in motion, even if the mitzvah hasn't itself happened yet. And once the mitzvah is set in motion, you can make a bracha on the thing. And as long as you've set it in motion, if something goes awry, you don't have to try to amend it or try to remedy it. He says, "Hakaman dechashiv." The next bold, "Hakaman dechashiv kiyum ha'aseh b'hechsher mitzvah kemo b'mitzvah ma'atzma v'lachein mevarchinan aleha." He says this is the same principle when it comes to lighting this candle. The hechsher mitzvah is itself, right, equated with the performance of the mitzvah, and for that reason, whether it's a Tuesday night or a Friday night, whether it's 5:02 on Tuesday or 4:02 on Friday, if you lit the candles and they've gone out, there is no obligation to relight them. And now, just so you don't take the Trumas Hadeshen's word for it, notice what happens in the Shulchan Aruch, source number 9. The Shulchan Aruch goes on record and says, and this will sound very familiar, Hadlaka osim mitzvah lefikach in kapsa kodem shavar zmana ein zakuk la. Lighting is the mitzvah, and if the flame goes out before the time has elapsed, you don't have to relight it. Ve'afilu kapsa be'erev Shabbos kodem kabbalah Shabbos shadayin hu mibod yom ein of zakuk la, straight out of the Trumas Hadeshen. And in this case, right, the Ashkenazic tradition became normative not just for Ashkenazim, But even for Svardim, the Shulchan Aruch picked up on the comments of the Trumas Sedeshin and included them into the core of the Shulchan. If we have time, two final examples. Source number 10. You with me?
Mm-hmm.
Source number 10. This is a little obscure, but quite fascinating conceptually. She'elah. B'nei Adam hidliku b'bayis echad. Multiple people are lighting Hanukkah candles in one home. V'nis arba ner Hanukkah achas ben shtei neros shehen shamashin. So we all know that when it comes to Hanukkah candles, you're not permitted to benefit from their light, as opposed to the shamash or any other candle where you can benefit from the lights. One of the reasons we use a shamash is so that if anybody should benefit from the light of the candles, we'll say you're benefiting from the light of the shamash and not benefiting from the candles that have been used for the mitzvah itself. In this case, the Trumas Sedeshin says there was a mix-up. And now one of the Hanukkah candles has been mixed up among several other non-Hanukkah candles. Pekulan, munachin, vidolkin, they're all kind of standing and burning. V'lo yadinan eza min haneros ner Hanukkah, you don't know which is which. Shari al yedei bittul barov v'muti lehanus mishloshtan olav. Do you say there's a principle of bittul? You know, a drop of milk falls into your chicken soup. It's application of bittul. In that case, you need 60 to 1. In this case, you just need a simple majority, and you have it, right? 2/3 of these candles are surely permissible to use, so maybe we could just assume that the third candle is considered to be batel. It's as if it's nullified. Conceptually, you don't have to worry about it, and of course, you can use all three candles. Do you apply the principle of bittul in this case? Tshuva, Yirali de lo batul. He says, I don't think so. Even though in normal circumstances, when it comes to non-liquid items, we always apply the principle of bittul birov, as long as you have more than 50% of the stuff is one quality as opposed to the other, you can apply the principle of bittul. Umutar b'chol hatarovos kul. It says hachu havu davar shebeminyan sharei madlikin oso beminyan kol halayla. Now the Trumas Sedeshin applies radical concept that we never would have thought would apply in this case. There is, and I'll just say a word of context, there's something called the davar shebeminyan. Sometimes the rules of bittul are suspended. One of the cases that the Talmud tells us where bittul is suspended is something called a davar shebeminyan. If something is sold not by weight but by number, you have a dozen eggs. If they're sold by a particular quantity, so that tells you that they are more substantial, they're more chashuv, they're somehow of a higher quality than anything else that we're talking about. Those kinds of items are just, they're an exception to the rule. They're just not subject to bittul. Okay. Davar shebemin. So the Trumas Sedeshin says, Hanukkah candles are davar shebeminyan. What? Hanukkah candles saying they cost nothing, they're worth nothing. You could buy 100 of them for $1. Like it's not a thing. Davar shebeminyan is because they're so important. What are you telling me? Davar shebeminyan applies to Hanukkah candles? He says, look at the bold. He says, "V'hadlaka b'minyan zehu mitam chovas ha-mitzvah shekach mitzvasa." Totally novel interpretation of what davar shebeminyan means. He says, "Nira lamar afal pikein ho benis arvu la'achar shahadlakas sheidliku lemitzvos v'hashtahen dvarim shebeminyan bil milsayu afagav delinyan cholok v'hagavnu lo haver davar shebeminyan mikra shapir davar shebeminyan." He says it's true. If you just walked into CVS, maybe that's not a good example because they always charge more than fair market value, but you walked into some normally priced store and you wanted to buy 100 candles, so it'd be a de minimis, it'd be a couple bucks, it'd be nothing. That's true. right? And under normal circumstances, we would never consider candles something that would be a davar shebeminyan. But because you're counting candles on Hanukkah for the use of a mitzvah, those candles become attached to this definition of davar shebeminyan and cannot be considered subject to bittul. And so he says, those candles, right? That specific case, one candle mixed among that. No, even though it could be one of 100, right? You could take the case ad absurdum. 99% chance, that only one of these candles, 1% of these candles is really only problematic. No, it can never be overwhelmed. It can never be considered to be a bittul, because you're using the thing for a mitzvah. It has this chashivus that can never be ignored and never be denied. And once again, source number 11. Again, these are not cherry picked. I'm almost going siman by siman. Almost every halacha mentioned in Hilchos Chanukah in the Trumas Hadeshen, almost every one finds its way directly into the Shulchan Aruch and Ramah. Here's another one, source 11. That you wouldn't have expected, right? It's a kind of unusual case. It's not sort of standard. Why would it make it into the code? Excuse me, makes it into the code because we have a Trumas Hadeshen. Im nisarev ner Chanukah aser behana b'shar neirus afilu achad be'elef lo batil dehave davar shel minyan. Well, the Ramah just wholesale accepts this massive chiddush of the Trumas Hadeshen and almost verbatim, right, cites this as the normative halach. Okay, one final example, and then we'll wrap up. In my experience, I would say somewhere between 99 and 100% of menorahs that we find are straight, right? Which is to say, the candles are lined up, or the places for the candles or the places for the oil are lined up quite neatly. And the reason for this is because the whole objective of lighting Hanukkah candles is so that they can signify what night of Hanukkah we're celebrating. So technically speaking, halachically speaking, you don't need a menorah. If you want to just plop down 4 candles on the 4th night of Hanukkah on your table, that's perfectly acceptable, right? The only thing that we're trying to accomplish is a sense of visibility. Someone who's just an onlooker should be able to discern that there are 4 candles here and it's the 4th night of Hanukkah. And if you start having all kinds of creative and wacky designs for a menorah, and there's a candle in the front and there's a candle in the back, and one is higher and one is lower, so that just might get missed. So we kind of revert to a level of simplicity. For the sake of the onlooker, we want to be sure that your average onlooker is going to be able to tell without too much challenge. 4 candles, it's the 4th night of Hanukkah. So the Trumas Hadeshen entertains the following question. He says, what if you want to get a little more creative? She'ila, source 12. Pemutos shel nechoshes asuyin kanim yotzin sevivos beigul shari lahadlik behen b'Chanukah ulo. I don't have an exact picture in my mind of what he's describing, but I think what he's describing is a brass candelabra where you have a series of what do you call them? Protrusions? Someone give me a better word than that. The wings of the candelabra. What would you call them? Must be some name for those wings.
Armature.
What are they called?
The armature.
Is that a word? I didn't know that.
Yes.
Okay. So the
branches,
armatures of the candelabra produce a circle. So, and you've seen these, right? Some of you maybe use them on Friday nights, and maybe there's 4 branches, maybe there's 6, however many there are, usually one in the center. So he says, can you use that kind of candelabra on Hanukkah? And again, you have to remember, not everyone can afford a separate candelabrum. Not everyone has access to one. So if you have one already, maybe it's just easier, more convenient. Can I use this circular candelabrum as my menorah on Hanukkah? So the Trumas Hadeshen's answer, I think, will surprise you. He says, yeah, no problem. Yira Deshari, no problem at all. Perfectly acceptable. He says there's a description in the poskim of like floating wicks in a big tub of oil, and they're kind of in the shape of a circle. He says that's obviously going to be a problem because you have no idea how many wicks are floating and how many candles are burning, and no one can tell what's what and how many days were meant to be signifying. But he says in this case, provided that the branches are not on top of each other and everyone could tell, you look at the thing and there's 4 candles, and I don't need a PhD in visual spatial reasoning to identify that there's just any observer could tell there's 4 candles here. So he says it's no problem at all. And the Ramah in source number 13 writes the following. He says, Yesh li zar lahamid aneros b'shura b'shabeh v'lo be'igul d'havei kimedura. And this is what animates the whole menorah industry, is this line. He says you have to be very careful to set up your candles in a straight line and not in a circle, right? Not in a semicircle like a medura, like a bonfire, where you just have a bunch of different flames and no one can actually differentiate them one from the other. And that's where the menorah industry kind of stops. But if you keep reading in the Ramah, Umutir lahalik bepamuto shekarin lampa. Sound familiar? Miachar shekol ner muvdal harbe mechavera. As long as there's some space between the candles, as long as there's some space between the candles, and everyone will be able to tell that it's the second night, it's the fourth night, it's actually no problem at all. Now, I've not seen this. I would say really like somewhere between 99 and 100% of menorahs in 2023 are designed according to the first half of that statement in the Ramah, flat, straight, in a line, so that everyone can see them. But if you read the second half of the Ramah, a direct citation of the Trumas Hadeshen's position that says it's actually no problem to use a semicircle or a funny-shaped menorah, provided that any onlooker will be able to tell without too much trouble just what night of Hanukkah it is. Okay. In the interest of time, I'll just summarize the last source that I have for you on the source sheet. One final halacha, and that is in shul on Saturday night. When do you light candles? You have to make Havdalah and you have to light Hanukkah candles. Which comes first? Normally we have a tradition. Normally we have a rule. Tadir v'she'eno tadir, tadir kodem. Whichever mitzvah, whichever practice is more prevalent and more commonly practiced takes precedence. Okay, so it's Rosh Chodesh and it's Hanukkah, and at the end of davening you're going to say Baruch Nafshi and Mizmor Shir Chanukah Sabayis L'Dav. Which one comes first? So Rosh Chodesh comes more often than Hanukkah. You say Rosh Chodesh, right? That's the operative principle. So you say Havdalah 52 weeks a year, you light Hanukkah candles 8 nights a year, you think Havdalah should come first. Except the Trumas Hadeshen says, no. In this case, in shul and at home, there's a debate actually as to which comes first. But in shul, the Ashkenazic poskim all agree, because of the Trumas Hadeshen, that in shul you light Hanukkah candles ahead of Havdalah. there is a principle that you always want to extend Shabbos. So you make Kiddush early, you make Havdalah late, to the extent that you can extend Shabbos on one end to the other. That's always an operative objective. And so in this case, rather than making Havdalah and ending Shabbos, right, even though obviously you've said Havdalah in Shmona Esrei such that you're able to light Hanukkah candles, but you want to push the Havdalah with candle and a kos, you want to push that as late as possible. And so you light Hanukkah candles in shul before you light Havdalah candle, before you say Havdalah in shul. And again, the Ramah codifies this, and this became the normative practice, right, for all of Klal Yisrael, at least Ashkenazic Jewry. So what I've tried to demonstrate in these examples is that you should know the Trumas Hadeshin. He doesn't always get cited explicitly. We don't always mention his name, but just beneath the surface, so much of normative Ashkenazic practice, particularly as codified by the Ramah, by Rav Moshe Isserlis, is actually based directly on the quote unquote tshuvos, on the quote unquote responsa of Rabbi Israel Isserlis. I'll just conclude by saying there's two pieces to the tshuvos of Rabbi Israel. Sometimes he, as we've seen, is actually quite mechudash. He's saying something which is novel and perhaps even unexpected. And sometimes he's actually not sharing his own thoughts at all, but he's actually just transmitting what he's observed or what's already happening on the ground, what he's inherited in his legacy of Ashkenazic tradition. So some of these traditions, if you have them in the Trumas Hadeshin, you could say they go all the way back to the 15th century. And some of them go all the way back to the 15th century and go back much further, because the Trumas Hadeshin in some cases is innovating, and in many cases is transmitting what in fact was a much earlier tradition. So it's just I find to be a powerful and very beautiful notion to think about on a holiday when we celebrate the Masorah and the continuity of the Jewish people, to just see in practice, right, the way that we're lighting Hanukkah candles, and when we say Havdalah and in shul, and what kind of menorah we use, that these halachos are being animated by traditions that are not 50 years old and 100 years old, not just from our great grandparents, but it's from, right, a Masorah that dates back to the medieval period, at least to the 15th century, and very often much earlier. And what a beautiful testimony to the capacity of the Jewish people to preserve our Masorah, and how beautiful that on the holiday that celebrates our continued existence by Amim Mahem Bazman Hazeh, that we pay tribute to these beautiful practices and these beautiful traditions, which are quite old and quite sacred. So I'm going to stop here, but happy to stay on and talk more about the Trumas Hadeshin or entertain any questions. And I'll wish everyone in advance Freilich and Hanukkah, and it's a time of miracles, and we need them. We should hear only Besoros Tovos in the coming days and in the coming weeks.
Should we see